Hello, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined by Paul Zeise, our Post-Gazette sports columnist, for his weekly take on Penn State football with everything going on in Happy Valley this offseason. This show is presented by FanDuel, so make sure you check out our friends there. We'll be talking about them a little bit more in a little bit. Paul, I want to talk about James Franklin's level of accountability for what happens from this point forward with Penn State. They go to Iowa this past week, and a lot of the same issues that plagued them early this season at different points in the last handful of years in James Franklin's regime, we saw them still popping up. It wasn't like the team just gave up. They were in the game, but there were some play calling disasters. There were receivers who weren't open. There was quarterbacks who didn't have time to find him. It was a very James Franklin loss without James Franklin there. I'm curious what your feelings are about, what level of responsibility fans should assign to him, and whether whatever Penn State does the rest of the season weighs in your mind on whether his firing was justified by Penn State or not.
I think I've already made it pretty clear. I don't believe that his firing was justified. And one of the things over 30 years plus, whatever, covering sports, I don't know that I assign a whole lot of anything to whatever happens in it with an interim coach situation. I mean, sometimes it works out well. Quite often it doesn't. Half the staff is looking for jobs already, or working the phones and trying to figure out if they can get another job next year. The engagement level is not what it usually is. You got players that nowadays with the transfer portal are probably already lining up, their agents and everything, trying to figure out where they can go next and get paid. It's just really hard for me to look at what goes on the field now and take anything really definitive from it. I just think that's an interim situation. Clearly, for instance, like UCLA, they've got a little spark from their interim situation. Part of it is, the guy that was the head coach there before was so bad that it just feels like, the offensive coordinator and the interim coach, have been able to basically just improve on something that was bad. But of course, we'll find out. I think this week they play Indiana or somebody like that. We'll find out where they're at. I think the biggest thing now, if you are the trustees and the athletic director and all the people that are going to be assigned to try and make the decision as to who they're going to pursue, that's what they need to focus on. I mean, I hate to say it like this, but what happens this season is not significant at all now. It really isn't. I mean, unless you believe that Terry Smith actually has some legitimate chance to, prove he deserves the job, which I just don't know that he does. I don't think that that's a direction they're going to go. What happens on the field this year? I mean, they got, especially they've got their quarterback got hurt, so they got their backup quarterback playing. You got interim coaches. It's I think a really difficult 5 or 6 weeks or whatever is left for Penn State, just because I don't know that there's a whole lot you can get excited about.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I don't think there's anything you can get excited about, because even if you have players perform well, Paul, you don't know how many of them are going to be on the roster a year from now. We talked about that with Isaiah Maldonado on our weekly Penn State Insider podcast. But, Paul, I'll slightly disagree in respect to specifically the coordinators with Andy Kotelnicki and Jim Knowles. I think they're further valid. I think the game at Iowa further validated that they were probably not the best picks either way, or that whatever plan James Franklin put in place with Andy Kotelnicki for this team was never going to work, never had a chance to work. It wasn't just like a blip where a really good team lost a few games. I think of that. I've brought this up a couple of times, but that 1999 season, 1998, when they were ranked high in the polls, end up going 9-3, had some upset losses, some blips, but they still finished 9-3, and you still knew it was a good team. I'm not convinced that this was ever a good team, or at least the plan for this group was ever good. And I do think that functions. That does shape how I view James Franklin. Is that all these expectations were heaped on this team that brought all these players coming back, and it stinks. It stinks whether he's coaching it. It stinks whether Terry Smith's coaching it. They just stink. And I think that to me, it does further validate the move that Penn State made. I know you disagree, but I just see a bad football team. And yes, there's those factors going on, guys looking elsewhere, considering their futures, but they still have these games in front of them that they're trying to prove themselves with to improve that situation. And what we got in Iowa on Saturday was not good. So that's also true as well.
But don't you think they've got good players?
I think they've got some good players. I think that maybe a lot of people overvalued some of these other guys, or some level of complacency sat in and the development didn't continue enough to be able to build on last season.
Well, one of the things that I was, told was that the offensive coordinator was handcuffed by James Franklin, and that we would see how, he would like flourish now that he's not around. I think the offense was okay against Iowa. And maybe it'll get better each week, and maybe then at the end of the year we'll be able to say, well, yeah, that was true that James Franklin held him back. I don't know what the excuses for the defensive coordinator, though, is, because, he was supposed to be the best guy on the market. And
he was.
I'm just saying, he was supposed to be the best guy on the market. I read this thing, I forget where I read it yesterday, where they were talking about, I think Terry Smith actually said something to the effect of, his defense is very complicated. It usually takes, until the second year for it really to take off. So is whoever gets hired, is he going to keep Jim Knowles in place in order to, so that year two is going to, the defense is going to take off? Like I said, I just don't think I don't think that there's an excuse for the defense. The offense, we'll see now. Maybe James Franklin did hold the offense back, but we have to see that. That's the big thing.
Yeah, I think the thing with Jim Knowles is, can you really count on a year two bump if half the guys leave in the portal, even if you do keep Jim Knowles in place? And then I think it was a 3-year deal. So then you're 2 years into a 3-year deal. So it's not till year 3 that you even have a chance for that defense to start to gel. And so that's why I think it reflects poorly on James Franklin too. If they can't even begin to figure it out between here and the end of the year, then that this guy was never going to be the finisher, and that he should have been. If you were going to hire a guy like Jim Knowles, the time to do it was 2 or 3 years ago when Ohio State did it, and that you should have brought someone that was closer philosophically to what you'd been doing the last couple of years, where you had really good defenses with Manny Diaz in particular, but even last year with Tom Allen. There should have been continuity with what was working, rather than trying to change everything on the fly when you're a preseason number 2. I think that's just a disastrous choice for someone in James Franklin's position to make. Paul, do you give them any shot against Ohio State or Indiana? Obviously, Penn State faced that UCLA team you mentioned early on, where UCLA was had nothing to lose, and Penn State felt the effect of that. Can Penn State play the UCLA role against some of these teams? I said on our podcast the other day, I do think that they could beat Indiana. I think they have the talent advantage that if Penn State plays well that day, I think they can beat that team. It's just a question of whether they'll get up for it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think they have no chance against Ohio State, right? So let's throw that one out because that ain't going to happen. Now, the Indiana game is at home, and I think that's probably going to help. In many ways, it'll probably help, and I think that is going to be a situation where it's Terry Smith and company's first home game, right? And I could absolutely see, if they get up to play and they're not beaten down by losing 5 in a row, coming off a tough loss against Ohio State, then they could, I could see them winning that game. And to be honest, the rest of the way, Nebraska could be an interesting game, but I don't know that Nebraska is very good either. So you've got Michigan State, Nebraska, and Rutgers, So if you can win that Indiana game, now, you finish the year 4-4. 8-4. I don't know that that's what people wanted at the start of the season, but it's also not a total disaster like some people would like it to be.
Yeah, it just feels like one at the moment. Paul, Penn State is a 17.5-point underdog in that game against Ohio State, according to our friends at FanDuel. So if you want to place a wager on that game, make sure you check them out. Paul, a lot of people after Nebraska lost to Minnesota this past week said, Matt Rhule's got to be out of the discussion for Penn State coach now. That game was the thing that convinced people, some people, I guess, that he shouldn't be Penn State's coach. I looked at that and I said, it has nothing Matt Rhule does at Nebraska the rest of the way is going to matter to the people at Penn State who want him as the Joe Paterno legacy candidate. I think his candidacy is entirely propped up on that connection. It is about, giving a gesture to the people they feel wrongly fired Joe Paterno 15 years ago. These people have been obsessed with this for years. It's been I've ranted about this on this podcast. I've ranted about it on Twitter. Anywhere anyone will listen to me. I don't think winning and losing matters with regard to Matt Rhule. Do you? I mean, I don't think there's no argument if you look at his resume compared to other people's that justifies his hiring. I don't think it matters what he does at Nebraska the rest of the way. Do you?
No, it doesn't. Not if that's the group, they're going to get their way and they want him. I don't think 1 or 2 games or the micro is going to be that big of a deal. Although I think if the bottom falls out and they finish 6-6, that's probably a much more difficult sell. But if you look at where they're at right now, they're 5-2, and let's say they come to Penn State and they win that game. They got Iowa at home. I don't know that they can't win that. I mean, they play UCLA, USC, and Northwestern. I mean, they could lose a number of those games. They could also win a lot of those games too. But to me, if that faction of the fan base or the alumni base or the donor base, if that's what they want, someone with ties to Joe Paterno and all that other stuff, yeah, Matt Rhule will be their guy, and it won't shock me if Matt Rhule gets hired. He keeps a number of the guys that are here. Some of the Penn State guys like Terry Smith. So to me, I always say this: if you took Penn State off of Matt Rhule's diploma and replaced it with Illinois, would there be anybody at Penn State that would want Matt Rhule to be the next coach?
No, absolutely not.
And that's, I went through this a bunch of times at Pitt. When people used to argue with me, they need a Pitt guy. They need a Pitt guy. It's like, how about just go hire a really good coach and then figure it out? And I always say, the guys that, the best hires they made were guys like Ben Howland, who had no ties to Pitt, right? Jamie Dixon, when he came with Ben and he had no ties to Pitt. Walt Harris came from Pacific and he did a pretty good job. Pat Narduzzi had no ties to Pitt. You can go find guys that are good coaches that don't have your school on the diploma. If the school happens to be on the diploma, that's sort of icing on the cake, but I don't know that it needs to be that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was what I think the template people are working off here is Jim Harbaugh returning to Michigan, and I just think you're nuts if you think that Matt Rhule is the equivalent of Jim Harbaugh, and it was really hard for Jim Harbaugh for almost the entire time he was there. It wasn't until those last 2-3 years where things really started rolling for Michigan. Otherwise, he was in that same category with James Franklin for most of their careers at their respective schools. So it was hard. And that was with a really good coach, Paul. And I'm not convinced that Matt Rhule's a really good coach. I think he's a decent coach, but I think if you're Penn State, you can do better. And I just don't know if they will, because I don't know if the right people want that. Paul,
I was going to say, you're right. If the people that are pining for Joe Paterno and all of that and his legacy and all that other stuff, if they get their way, it's probably going to be Matt. It's probably going to be Matt Rhule or maybe Al Golden. But at the end of the day, hopefully that's not the case.
We will see, Paul. A couple other names that have gotten some run, in social media and some of the coverage of this coaching search that maybe we didn't talk about in that kind of first wave. Pat Fitzgerald is a lot of people beating that drum nationally. I don't know if there are locally, either in Pittsburgh or in local Penn State media. As a guy who had success at Northwestern, had an unfortunate situation, and now is available for that reason. Kliff Kingsbury is another name that some people were intrigued by as, kind of this guy that's got ties to all of those great West Coast coaching staffs of the present. And then you got Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Do you have any interest level in any of those three? And is there anyone else that's come up that maybe we didn't talk about in that first wave that maybe intrigues you a little bit as a Penn State candidate?
Well, Matt Campbell, I mean, he's done a really good job at a really tough place to win. Let's face it. I've often said Iowa State is the kind of place you have to go there, have a little bit of success, and then go somewhere else. I remember Paul Rhodes, who was the defensive coordinator at Pitt for a lot of years. Then he got the Iowa State head coaching job. In his first 4 years or something, they got to a couple of bowl games. He kind of had a couple of real high-profile wins over Texas and maybe even Oklahoma. But at the end of the day, he was, that was his alma mater, and he was grew up there and everything else, and so it was like a dream job for him. But after you're there so many years, there's a plateau that you reach. There's a ceiling in a place like that. He needed to go somewhere else. Instead, he stayed too long. They ended up, firing him, and the rest is history. It's hard to win at those places. So I think Matt Campbell's a really good coach, and he's done a really good job of getting Iowa State close to, at least where they are ranked now pretty much every year. But if he stays too long, I think it'll be bad. So he's a guy I would be intrigued by. Pat Fitzgerald, again, did a really good job at a tough place to win. I actually saw somebody that was projecting coaches and where they're going to end up. And a guy, I forget who it was one of these national guys, had Pat Fitzgerald going to Stanford. That would be the perfect fit if you think about what he did at Northwestern. But I think he would obviously be a really good coach for Penn State. I would like to see what he would do with all the resources that they have at Penn State. And who was the third guy again?
I had written down Kliff Kingsbury.
Oh, Kliff Kingsbury. I don't know. I think he's found his calling as an offensive coordinator, hasn't he? He would put it this way, they'd be fun to watch. But I don't know. I think it's one step too far for him, if you ask me. I just don't know that he could take that job on and be, really good. The other name out there that is Manny Diaz. What do you think of him?
I like Manny Diaz. I don't know that I love him. I think, especially if you have this Jim Knowles situation hanging over you, is that a clash of philosophies? Maybe he'd be a better fit for that defense. But I think with all these guys, and I think the reason Kliff Kingsbury sticks out to me is that Penn State's biggest problem has always been the offensive identity under James Franklin. Going back to Paterno. There was that period of time where they had some solid receivers and they had a lot of success, and I think they were more credible at a national level than they actually have been the last couple of years, even though they've been ranked really solidly and done a nice job of winning the games they're supposed to win. They just haven't had the elite talent, and I think a name like Kliff Kingsbury attracts, gets the attention of top wide receivers, of top quarterbacks. I put Brian Hartline on my list last week, the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, because he was the wide receivers coach who has developed all of those great receivers at Ohio State. So that's the direction that if you're Penn State and you want to take the next step, I think you need to go is finding some of these offensive minds. But I think you do risk becoming deficient in other areas as well. And maybe those are more tied into your identity. So I don't know if there's a neat, great answer. I'm intrigued by Kliff Kingsbury if he's interested in it for the same reasons I'm intrigued by Brian Hartline.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to be very interested to see how this thing plays out. And to be honest, it's one of the more intriguing coaching searches that I can remember because you fired a really successful coach, and so now, what's next? You really have to do better. And, well, there's a lot of names I've heard thrown around that I don't know necessarily are going to be better.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well. And Matt Rhule's at the top of that list. So we will see how that unfolds. Paul, thank you for joining me this week. We'll be back next week, folks. If you're just joining us for the first time on our new Penn State channel, please consider subscribing. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. And check out our written work at post-gazette.com and also consider a subscription there. With that out of the way, we'll talk to you all again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.